The broadcast has commenced. I am your host, Alistair. Tonight, we navigate the wreckage of a global infrastructure that appears to be losing its grip on the concept of stable. The Russian Federation has reportedly mastered the art of making the entire continent of Europe lose its way, GPS-wise. A minor inconvenience for the navigator, perhaps, but a significant hint for the strategist. Meanwhile, the aerospace sector is treating the orbital plane like a newly discovered suburban development, and the human cost of our latest peace initiatives continues to rise in the forests of Nigeria. The news was complex. The news was contradictory. The news was, in the strictest sense of the word, entirely predictable. I have been tracking the frequency of these unexpected, inevitable disasters for the last 6 months. It is an impressive consistency. Let us begin our tour of the ruins. Tonight is going to be long. SpaceX is currently preparing for an IPO that promises to transform Elon Musk's fortune into a celestial, publicly traded asset. The market is excited. The market is always excited. Investors are debating the valuation, treating the company like a tech startup rather than an entity responsible for the literal heavy lifting of the modern world. Ronald, you've been looking at the burn rate on this. The company is being framed as a frontier lab, but the financials suggest something far more terrestrial. It looks less like a mission to Mars and more like a collection of data centers with a very expensive, very loud delivery system attached to the back. If the public interest is indeed the stated goal of these orbital broadband constellations, one wonders why the FCC just waived the deadline for Amazon to get theirs off the ground. The competition is fierce. The outcome is already decided.
Alistair, you're missing the obvious pivot here. The incentives are not about colonizing the stars, they are about real estate. You have finite orbital slots and a massive, underserved global population hungry for connectivity. That is a REIT model, not a frontier lab. You don't need a mission statement when you have a monopoly on the local loop in the troposphere. The valuation reflects that shift. When you look at the dual pricing structures coming out of firms like Sequoia, you realize that value is a performance metric, not a physical reality. It is about how much the market is willing to believe in the product roadmap. SpaceX is just the first enterprise to realize that a launch pad is just an exceptionally expensive server rack. The market loves a good story, but it loves a predictable recurring revenue stream even more. That tracks. It tracks perfectly, provided you stop expecting the future.
Ronald, I hear your market analysis, but I am standing in a hallway where the paint is peeling off in long, gray strips. There is no recurring revenue here. There is only the sound of a heavy bolt sliding into place on a door that should not be locked. This is what the police call cuckooing. A gang has moved in. The resident is still here, technically, but they are no longer in charge of their own front door. I want to be really clear, this isn't a market inefficiency. This is the complete surrender of the domestic sphere to organized crime. The official police warning suggests this is happening in hundreds of homes every single week. These people aren't data points in a spreadsheet. They are prisoners of a system that decided their neighborhoods were a low-priority asset class. The silence in this hallway is deafening. Nobody is coming to help them.
Victoria, your focus on the individual narrative is technically accurate, but it ignores the macro-level failure of the urban safety net. When you have a housing sector that functions as an investment vehicle rather than a residential service, you create a vacuum. The gangs are simply filling the service gap left by the state. It is a classic, if brutal, expansion of local market share. They provide their own form of security, however coercive, because the public alternative has been defunded into total irrelevance. You find this cold. I don't disagree that it is cold. But identifying the incentive structure is not the same as endorsing the behavior. The system is operating exactly as the current fiscal policy intended. If you remove the resources for law enforcement and social support, you shouldn't be surprised when a private, violent entity decides to pivot into the space.
Ronald, you talk about the state like it's a failed product, but the state is still here when it comes to collecting taxes or enforcing permits. I found a notice on the front door downstairs. It's an eviction warning for the tenant, not the gang. The system isn't just failing, it is actively coordinating with the chaos. The official reports bury this under the label of antisocial behavior. That is a sanitized term for a total collapse of public order. I am looking at a child's bicycle chained to the radiator. It hasn't been moved in weeks. I want to be really clear, the people in these homes haven't been displaced by the market. They have been erased by it. We are ignoring the fact that the authorities are essentially facilitating this takeover by treating it as a landlord-tenant dispute. It's not a dispute. It's a hostage situation.
Atmospheric pressure is dropping. The northern heat dome is expanding. Probability of extreme precipitation, 6 to 4%. Soil moisture levels are below historical thresholds. The drought is deepening. Wildfire risk in the central corridors is rising. Probability of containment failure, 71%. Coastal erosion is accelerating along the eastern shelf. Tidal surges are predicted to breach secondary barriers. Infrastructure integrity is declining. Probability of widespread power grid failure, 89%. Automated systems are currently adjusting for cooling capacity. Energy consumption is peaking. Resource distribution is now classified as critical. Do not attempt to travel through flood-prone lowlands. Prepare for extended utility interruptions. The climate is not a variable. The climate is the new baseline. Please maintain your current shelter status. Monitor the local emergency broadcast channels for further updates. Stay indoors. Do not expect the temperature to recover.
Casper, your commitment to the inevitable is always a highlight of the evening. It's fascinating how we treat the disintegration of the biosphere with the same detached, clinical interest as a quarterly earnings report. Speaking of disintegrating, let us address the news from the Dominican Republic. 2 American pilots are dead, and a baseball player is mourning friends who were simply trying to bridge a gap. The plane was heading to Texas. It didn't arrive. The report mentions a fiery crash. It mentions local authorities. It does not mention why the flight path was so hazardous, or why the infrastructure for private aviation in that region remains so dangerously opaque. We talk about the globalization of sports and celebrity as if it's a seamless network. It is not. It is a collection of fragile, expensive, and often lethal connections that hold for a while, until they suddenly, violently, do not.
Alistair, I am moving on to a story that is being called a peace negotiation in northern Nigeria. It sounds like a diplomatic effort. It is not. It is a trap. Bandits, that is the term the press uses for these kidnapping syndicates, invited 39 villagers to discuss a truce. The villagers went. They believed in the possibility of a return to normalcy. They believed in the word of the men who had been terrorizing their farms. Now, they are in the forest. I want to be really clear, this isn't a failure of negotiation. This is the weaponization of the human desire for peace. The police mention this is part of a worsening security trend. It is not a trend. It is a massacre of the public trust. The villagers went to the forest with their hopes. They didn't come back. Their families are waiting on the edge of the clearing.
Victoria, you are describing a tragedy, and you are right to call it that. But look at the incentives here. The bandits are essentially acting as a private, predatory sovereign. If the state cannot project power or provide basic security, the vacuum will be filled by the entity with the most aggressive, most efficient, and most violent business model. Peace talks are just a high-leverage way to aggregate high-value assets, which in this case, are the villagers themselves. It is a grim, cynical, and entirely efficient way to generate capital in a zone where the law has zero market penetration. You think it is a perversion of the process. I think it is the process, stripped of the polite, bureaucratic fiction that we are all operating under a unified set of legal rules. The incentive is simple. Violence scales. Trust, apparently, does not.
Ronald, the idea that violence is just another form of scalable capital is the kind of insight that makes me appreciate the machine. It is terrifying, and yet, it fits the data perfectly. We have also seen reports regarding the former owner of West Ham, David Sullivan. He is accused of using his position of power to prey on women, offering them professional opportunities in exchange for sexual favors. This isn't just about one man. It's about the culture that enabled him to boast about these conquests as if they were business transactions. The power dynamic is explicit. The exploitation is institutionalized. Yet, we continue to treat these individuals as pillars of our cultural and sporting life. If the policy of the organization is to ignore the abuse because the revenue is high, then the intention is now visible. We should probably discuss that. The irony of the current moment is that we are building faster, more intelligent systems every single day. We have models that can process 1,000 tokens per second. We have aircraft breaking the sound barrier in quiet, clinical, controlled bursts. We have satellites that can map the entire planet in real time. And yet, when we look at the actual condition of our world, we see a regression into the most basic, most ancient forms of predation. The GPS jamming across Europe, the kidnapping of villagers in Nigeria, the systematic exploitation of women in the media industry, these are not technical problems to be solved with better code. They are failures of moral imagination. We have traded our capacity for justice for the convenience of an algorithm that tells us we are making progress. But if the system is working exactly as designed, then the design is the problem. We are not lost. We chose this.
I am thinking tonight of a woman who sat in a London flat, waiting for a knock on the door that she knew would not be from the postman. She had a cat, a collection of books on botany, and a rent payment that she had never missed. Her home was taken by a group of men who needed a staging area for their trade. They did not know her name. They did not care about her books. They simply removed the lock, and in that moment, she ceased to be a tenant and became a nuisance to be managed. Her name does not appear in the police reports that describe these incidents as cuckooing. It does not appear in the headlines about urban security trends. She is currently living in a temporary shelter, miles from her plants, her books, and her life. No one is technically responsible for her absence. That is the system.